Hello and good afternoon. My name is Chandrakant Laharia and I'm going to moderate this session. Some of you who joined for our earlier webinar
would request everyone else to please keep yourselves
some of those.
Yeah.
So this is the second webinar in a two-part webinar series focused upon leaving no one behind. The theme of the two webinars is COVID-19 home isolation for vulnerable population. We had the part one of webinar titled as Ears to the Ground that was held on 1st June 2021. And today is the second webinar in this series. Some of you who attended the part one know that we had 7 panelists. They discuss about broader policy issues on home isolation. Before we start on this webinar, I want to flag and highlight what are the key discussion points. We heard from our panelists in the first webinar that home isolation has various challenges. And that's why we discussed the various aspects of how to operationalize the home isolation. There are 2 guidelines which exist in the country. One is national guidelines on home isolation, and then there is a detailed guidelines on the management and containment of COVID-19 in rural and peri-urban areas. These 2 guidelines outline the broader principles of home isolation, but at the first point in the slide say that we know that it is not that easy to implement home isolation. We are exploring as part of these 2 webinar series that how to operationalize the broad principles of home isolation. And the participant or the panelist in the previous webinar flagged some challenges and tried to or attempted to find the solutions. One of the panelists suggested that we should not be looking home isolation in a very narrow sense of isolation only, rather it should be an approach of home management. We would have a more discussion on that. What does it mean? The panelists also highlighted that home isolation does not mean that entire responsibility of asymptomatic or a mild COVID-19 patient is shifted to the family. The health system still has a role to facilitate and support the process. So home isolation is, though individual will be isolated in home for a particular pattern or under specific guidelines, but health system still need to follow them up. It was discussed that the communication has an even more role in home isolation, and it includes on home isolation, but also to communicate then when and how to and what process need to be followed to go to hospital for next setup. Then home isolation should be delinked or sufficient measures should be taken to ensure that home isolation does not result in stigma in any form, because we know that different settings may have its own challenges and stigma, while we may not realize, or discrimination could be a real challenge. So there should be specific attention on that area. The mental health and psychosocial issues should be given attention. It requires a large number of volunteers to ensure that correct monitoring is done and the timely care is provided to the patients in the home isolation. So these were some of the points, and then this is the next slide on which the key issues which were flagged were that even though it's home isolation, but it does not do away with the need for contact tracing. Contact tracing as much important as whether person is in institutional setup or home isolation. It was also discussed that while for asymptomatic or mild patients, home isolation is recommended approach, but that should not be the only approach. If people demand or people want a better provision and want to go for institutional isolation, that kind of arrangement should be made. Essentially, it is that the same point that government cannot completely delegate and say that if this particular group falls into home isolation, then home isolation is the only choice for them. Sufficient provision for institutional isolation should be done, even if person can be isolated in the home. The approaches such as hostels, auditoriums, hotels need to be leveraged as has been done in the past. But the point which was flagged is that while there is an increasing emphasis on home isolation, the other approaches should not be stopped or reduced. There should be sufficient attention or intervention from the government. The flexibility to the patient and family on deciding on home isolation should be entirely with the family. It was discussed that home isolation is a difficult choice for women. So it's important that they are trained how to manage on home isolation. The teleconsultation has an increasing importance in home isolation, as and when it increases, and also specifically for women and other vulnerable groups. The idea is that while home isolation is a good concept, but in rural area, it may not be really feasible or possible. So that's why it's important that the home isolation approach should be supplemented by the setting up or creating a functional COVID centers in rural settings. In addition, it was discussed that the capacity building of community worker is essential part of spreading awareness to improve home hygiene practice by people around the home isolation. The IEC, radio jingles, and involvement of panchayat, self-help group, farmer organization should be increased to spread awareness and reduce stigma and discrimination. So these were some of the broader points which were discussed in the webinar 1. Now we know that in this webinar, we have some of the practitioners who are working in this area. So we want to hear your field insight on these aspects. So this webinar is titled, earlier one was titled as Ears to the Ground, and this webinar is Eyes to the Ground. So I welcome the panelists for this webinar. We have 6 eminent panelists, but before I go to the main panel, I would like to invite Ms. Cindy Gire, Ms. Cindy Gire, who is a USAID COVID response team member, for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrakant. And thank you for the summary of the Ears to the Ground seminar. I think that we're off to a good start, and I'm looking forward to the Eyes to the Ground seminar today. So it's a pleasure to be with you all. And I just wanted to say that obviously these are very difficult times for India, and the United States is committed to standing with you to fight COVID-19, just as India did for us in the early days of the pandemic. Our COVID-19 collaboration builds on more than 70 years of partnership and cooperation in health, biomedical, and behavioral health fields. To mitigate the challenges posed by COVID-19, we are working closely with the government of India and our partners to respond, delivering more than $100 million for India's COVID relief and response effort. USAID has reached nearly 11 million Indians across all states and union territories, providing life-saving care and treatment, strengthening public health messages and safety precautions to local communities, strengthening case finding and surveillance, and mobilizing innovative financing solutions to bolster emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. Through our flagship project, NISHTA, implemented by JPIGO, USAID works to support and strengthen health systems and primary care in India under Ayushman Bharat. And I'd just like to give a special shout out to the NISHTA team. They've worked so hard since the beginning of this pandemic on so many fronts. And I know that they've personally experienced sickness and loss themselves, and they've really been an incredible team to work with. So I just wanted to thank them for their partnership. The USAID NISHTA's project, Multi-Pronged COVID-19 Response, includes working with frontline workers to prevent and slow down the spread, support the national and state governments in their requests for COVID-19 response, supporting the local communities, especially vulnerable populations, with the tools needed to fight COVID-19, and ensure continuation of reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, and adolescent health, as well as other essential services. As we've already discussed, this devastating pandemic, the second wave, has affected so many of our friends, relatives, colleagues, neighbors, and has had a particularly large impact on vulnerable populations, to include the rural and urban poor, migrant workers, differently abled people, LGBTQ populations, women, and so many more. These populations have limited access to water, sanitation, hygiene facilities, often live in cramped conditions where it is difficult to socially distance and isolate at home. Often implementation of government recommendations, as you've discussed, such as home isolation, become extremely difficult. We at USAID firmly believe that strategies designed to mitigate the effects of COVID-19 must be made context specific. While considering individual contexts, bringing together learnings from a wide range of socioeconomic, cultural, and geographically vulnerable populations can help us learn from experiences that may be much more widely applicable. So I welcome this webinar series that actively engages experts like yourselves in order to understand the various operational approaches for home-based care for vulnerable populations. Now is the time to learn from each other and get creative using innovative tools and technologies to support home isolation and care if that's appropriate. And obviously flexibility is paramount. So today I warmly welcome all of our panelists and participants, and I look forward to an enriching and engaging discussion. And I really thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ms. Gayer. And just to let the participant know that Ms. Gayer is joining from United States, so this must be really early for you. But this also highlights your commitment to this dialogue and discussion. So thank you very much for your participation in delivering these opening remarks. I just want to highlight to the participant that Ms. Gayer is a USAID India Health Office, works with the USAID India Health Office, and she's the coordinator for Center for Accelerated Impact and Innovation, Health System Strengthening Division. So thank you very much, Ms. Gayer. Now we will move to, with your opening remarks and the perfect background you have set up, we move to the main panel discussion. In this main panel discussion, we have 6 speakers who will be delving into 6 different areas: urban poor, disability, the community experience and focus with the focus on migrants, the mental health issue, rural settings and tribal population, and some of the grassroots experience in home isolation. So this will complement what we had discussed last time in our previous webinar, where we looked at the policy issue, and now this is about the grassroots implementation and field experience. So without further ado, I would like to invite the first panelist, Dr. A.M. Kadri, who is Secretary General of Indian Association Preventive Social Medicine, the organization which is co-hosting this event. He is also Executive Director of Gujarat Health System Resource Centers. He would be talking about home isolation in urban poor. Thank you very much, Dr. Kadri, for joining, and over to you. Dr. Kadri.
Hello.
Yes, yes, sir. Dr. Kadri, yes, please.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
So, first of all, I welcome on the behalf of the Indian Association of Preventive and Social Medicine all the esteemed panelists and the energetic, enthusiastic participants. Thank you for joining the important discussion in this COVID period. And it is, I think, very important. We thought about that it will be ending, but still, I think it is pertinent that we should think about. And when we have the experience of the COVID for more than 1.5 years, now definitely we have to now be more strategic. And I'm happy that in this discussion, we have focused on the specific group, vulnerable groups, because when we have started with this COVID, control of the COVID, what we have learned about the COVID is that we have started with the SMS, that is the social distancing, mask and sanitizers. And I think then we have added, particularly with people who are working in the field, they have added 3 V's, I will be saying. 3 V's are one is the vaccinations, another is the vulnerables, and the third is the ventilation. And when I have been assigned talking about the migrant people living in the slum, definitely they are vulnerable. Also, they are having issues with the ventilation when they are living into the sorry for
some disturbances because I have to switch over from one device to another device. So now coming to the most important part about is this. We have to focus on this, why slum in the urban area becomes important focus. So first of all, I will be saying that most important part is that the COVID has started. Definitely, it was largely urbanization, and still the urban population is because of certain inherent factors in the urban population. We are seeing that they are at the vulnerability. And amongst the urban, when the COVID has started, definitely slum is the most, because of some inherent characteristics I will need not to go into, because it is known about that why they are most vulnerable compared to the other vulnerable group that I need not to describe about. But the most important thing that I would like about is how to do the home isolation in this most challenging situation. To start with, I will be saying immediately with the experiences what in the Gujarat we have said that home isolating the people in this from the slum area is practically was impossible. And the strategy what in the Gujarat we have adopted is that largely because the criteria set for the home isolation can't be matched in the slum population, and largely we have started with the moving them from home isolation to institutional isolation, and that is the most effective strategy for the slum population when it comes to the home isolating them. And again, in Gujarat, what we have done is that we have certain hostels are there, created large number of the hostels are created with large number of the rooms. And because of this lockdown and the closures of the institutes, they were vacant. So these institutes were used for the isolating these people from the slum area to the hostels, which are comparatively well ventilated, good rooms are a good number of the rooms are available, so that we can have the good isolation facilities. So this opportunity we have used it, but it has got another challenge. When you are isolating the people, particularly the people who are living in the slum area, and typically in Indian situation, we are so much socially attached with it. And in the slum, I think they are used to the social environment, though it may be difficult for some people, but they are used to. So when they are putting into the such types of separate isolation area, another challenge which has cropped up is their social disintegration from their environment. So how to tackle that is another challenge that we have faced about it. So the two points from my side I would like to stress upon is that when we are doing the home isolation for the slum population, home isolation is not the ideal, but we should move for the institutional isolations, and the institutional isolation has got its own challenge. So third strategy definitely which government has come up with the support of the community, local community, because this slum area we are saying that though they are the people, poor people, they are the people who are marginalized people, disadvantaged, but they are having certain local community organizations, which may not be there may be like philanthropist organizations or voluntary organizations. They are working in the areas. So one thing is that also they are having their own community organizations. So the local opportunities were there. So it was tried to tap in and created the community isolation facility within the slum area, and that is I think more acceptable and also less cost incentive, at the same time better manageable. So because that was another strategy that we have adopted for the home isolating the people who are living in the slum area. So that is another strategy we have thought about. The fourth point that I would like to, based on the experience in the field where we are working, I would like to say that we have to also try to see that, because it is like one spark in the dry woods, what we'll be saying that. So it will be when virus enters into this community, and if they are virgin and not having this good natural herd immunity develop, what would happen? It will spread like a wildfire. So definitely when we are talking about the slum, about the home isolation, additional this home isolation, I will be stressing upon that we should take all the care, particularly when we are feeling that expecting that there will be a impending third wave. So definitely we should take care of that. These people are being the most vulnerable at the disadvantage, but and having the factors which can fuel this or transmission. We should take all the due care for prevention, and this prevention definitely nowadays vaccination is the most important thing. So definitely we should prioritize this particular group because of their environmental factors. At the same time, their occupational reasons, they are also, like we can say that more having people interaction with during their occupations because of their unorganized sector occupations they are largely involved into. So they should be focused, prioritize in the vaccination. Besides that, all other measures should be, we should ensure that this infections not enter into the, or minimum infections enter into the area. So that is the another important area point that I would like to stress upon when we are talking about the slum population as a vulnerable group in the COVID pandemic era. So this is all from my side as a remark for the vulnerable population, specifically focusing on the urban slum population. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kadri, for joining. Yes, so I have, since I know you have to leave for some other engagement, so I have a quick question that is there any model or any approach in for urban setting for home isolation, which you would like to suggest that which can be emulated or copied in any other setting?
Yeah, in fact, what I suggested, we should have some community isolation centers, because in the slum area also, if we have to identify the area which is relatively having the space and we can accommodate 10 or 15 people and they can be isolated. So they will be within the community and it is to be managed by the community people. So they were saying that they are within the amongst themselves and comparatively socially don't feel alienated from the or cut off from the. So that is the one strategy that in the Gujarat we have done. So that is the community care isolation center, what we are saying that. So CCC is there, community care center is there, which is largely for the asymptomatic and mild patients, like in the triaging guideline of the government of India. We have added one C before this and one I within that. That is the community COVID care isolation center, we'll be saying. So that is the one strategy we should adapt about. Otherwise, it is very difficult to have the home isolation with all the stringent criteria set in for the home isolation. So I think it is very difficult. So that is the only strategy where, depending upon local opportunity and engaging the local community organizations, we can have that home isolation within the community. So I will be saying the community-based isolation than the home-based isolation.
Okay, so that's really very helpful, and thank you very much for sharing this experience, because what you are saying is somewhere between mid of community or COVID care center and home isolation. So it's an amalgamation of two in a sense, and you are saying that this has been practiced in Gujarat. So thank you very much for your really valuable feedback. We might get back to you about more details of this community care isolation centers. So thanks, and I would request you that if possible, please stay as much as possible. Otherwise, I thank you in advance.
My apologies, because I have to reach 4:30 at our principal secretary's office. Some important meeting is there. But thanks, it is really a very enriching experience and a privilege to be part of this August panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kadri. Then, so now I'll move to Dr. Vaishali Kolhe. She has completed her PhD in speech disability and is an associate professor and former chairperson of the Center for Disability Studies and Action at the School of Social Work at Tata Institute of Social Sciences. She has done extensive work on disability and related areas, and her work is widely known and recognized. So we have with her expertise, we request Dr. Kolhe to please discuss about the possible ways and operational approaches for home isolation, specifically for people living with disability. Dr. Kolhe, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Chandrakant Leria. And I specifically would like to thank you and Kritika for inviting me for this very significant seminar on eyes to the ground, leaving no one behind. I also would like to thank the USAID Nishtha, JPGO, and IAPSM for including disability as one of the significant part of the webinar in terms of working with vulnerable population regarding COVID-19 and home isolation. Because disability is generally, having a very silent position in terms of designing all kind of strategies for COVID-19. I would like to say that the disaster management authorities have recently developed a manual on inclusive disaster guidelines for keeping in mind the persons with disability. Also, the the NGO called one of the NGO National Institute National NIP, it's called. The name is on my tongue. One of the NGO has also developed quarantine facilities for persons with disability, which I'll forward to you. Thank you once again, and I'll straight away go to the main point and my presentation. COVID-19 and home isolation for persons with disability, and looking at planning the quarantine facilities and home isolation facilities. I would like to focus on challenges and interventions to whatever brief extent I can. As per the United Nations guidelines, which has come in context of the UNCRPD, which is available, and with what basically the database talked about that how the global crisis of COVID-19 is deepening, and looking at the inequalities and exposing to the extent of exclusion of persons with disabilities, very important to mainstream the disability inclusion within developing and framing guidelines for COVID-19. 1 billion people with disabilities are there as are hit by this COVID-19 crisis, and as per the UN report May 2020, and sensory disabilities are one of the key disabilities which are highlighted in the various kinds of guidelines. But what we need to understand that there are visible disabilities, there are invisible disabilities such as mental illness and thalassemia or any blood-related disabilities, which may require a different kind of care and interventions. So one of the very significant factor is when you plan various kinds of interventions of COVID-19 or home isolation and quarantine facilities, you need to look at the type of disabilities, degree of disabilities, and looking at the types of disability in terms of sensory disabilities, which may be a hearing disability or persons with autism or intellectual disability. So one need to really tailor-made the facilities as per the type and degree of disability. It's very important to understand the ecosystem in which the people with disability live. Who are the caregivers? Either the parents or community or people at homeless, they have caregivers who are part of the community itself. So one has to look at all kind of factors in which the ecosystem where the persons with disability live. The daily living patterns of persons with disability is very important in terms of activities of daily living, the routines which they follow, the sleep facilities in terms of where they will sleep, and all kind of facilities like wash arrangements and washrooms and safety arrangements for persons with disability. Also, the daily intake of nutrition during COVID-19 is an important factor. Also, behavioral issues of persons with disability, and also supportive, family has to be supportive, and whoever are the caretakers which are escort, which are being appointed for persons with disability, has to be trained in terms of what kind of caregiving and support system is required. Also, looking at significant factors affecting persons with disability are access to resources. One of the fundamental issues is language. When you talk to a deaf community, I have worked with, I have invited people, organizations working in the field of disability on the theme of COVID-19. And one of the NGO in Madhya Pradesh has worked with deaf community, and they have actually rehabilitated rehabilitated at least 700 persons with deafness who were stuck during the migration period, and they were not able to go back to their home and hometown. So they have discovered and developed this sign language facilities using phone calls, using video calling. And actually they have worked with the 20 disability commissioners across India, and because it was an interstate issues, and reaching to their house, and they do not know the even address of their house because they are not literate or not having those linguistic skills to identify their own houses, and the basic linguistic skills were missing. So they basically worked with the 20 disability commissioners to from Kashmir to Kanyakumari in terms of, reaching back home. And they used video calling as one of the strategy in terms of they were using sign language to communicate to the deaf population, because even if you have guidelines, and if it is not understood by a literate or illiterate deaf person, then one has to have different kinds of functions in place. So I would like to highlight that key factors in terms of planning home isolation for persons with disability. One needs to look at where are the facilities available, either at home or hospital. I was just talking to one of the disability commissioner in one of the South Indian state, and what they have done is they have tried to work with the health ministry and developed 1,000 bed services for persons with disability. And they're still planning to develop that 1,000 bed services for people with disability. So what they suggested that, you cannot club all the 1,000 persons with disability under one, like a separate facility, because they require escorts, they require, each one person with disability may require at least one caretaker. So if you plan 1,000 bed facilities for person with disability, you need to also find out that 1,000 caregivers also are there and living with them. And it's like a kind of a dependency situation. And then, what if the person with a caretaker is also diagnosed as positive? So there are complications in terms of persons with disability getting positive, then what kind of services are required? On the other hand, what kind of services are required for caregiver of persons with disability if they are, they are not available or they are diagnosed positive? So key factors whenever you are planning the home facilities for persons with disability, one of the fundamental factors is the type of disability, whether it's visual impairment or blindness, or it is low vision. One of my student was diagnosed with, she was a low vision person and diagnosed with COVID-19, and she was there in one of the Bombay's very well-versed home isolation, hospital isolation system. And she lived there for more than, 20 days till she was diagnosed negative. So she said, ma'am, it's only, the basic facilities are there, the food is there, but, I'm sitting at one place just looking at my mobile, but, overall facilities are not there. So this is like an SOS situation where hospitals are trying to develop the quarantine facilities, beside their hospital, and see to it that, but there is no inclusion of disability per se over there. So one needs to really fundamentally find out that what kind of disability inclusion is required in terms of at least basic services for persons with disabilities are required, especially in the context of the second factor I want to highlight over here is a degree of disability. Now, when you say degree of disability, I mean to say high support category. Now, people with profound intellectual disability or persons with cerebral palsy with profound needs has to be taken into consideration when we are planning the home quarantine facilities, especially home quarantine, and also in the hospital settings also when there are isolation facilities are provided, what kind of basic accessibility needs are required, which has to be developed based on the activities of daily living, right from the morning when the person gets up in the morning, taking them to the washroom, then coming back, and then, having a breakfast to be, or whatever food arrangements are there has to be provided. Then also in terms of daily routine, I was working with NGOs, especially who are run by parents of children with intellectual disability. And what they said that, what we do is to engage our children with disability, we allow them to call their family members, video calling, or teach them those kinds of engagement activities which will allow their sensory engagement to the fullest possible level, and make them, keep them happy in this kind of a situation. So they were using video calling to the family members, relatives, to engage them. But apart from that, when a person is diagnosed COVID positive, one has to look at accessibility issues, food accessibility, sleep accessibility, washroom accessibility, also looking at management of falls like head injury or injury, because when you keep them, somebody has to be there 24/7. Also aids and appliances. Suppose somebody is using, say, cochlear implant and the battery is gone, the person will be total deaf. So imagine a person who is hearing 24/7 and suddenly his cochlear implant is gone off, battery is off, or things are in a bad situation. Then how one has to look at these kinds of aids and appliances arrangements and maintenance arrangements, also escort arrangements with
Dr. Kole, quickly, maybe you have 2 more minutes, so if you can.
I'll just quickly, I'll give an example, 2-3 case studies I want to share. I think best practices.
Maybe best practices can be shared later on. We have your slides, so if you can tag a key issue, that will be helpful.
So if a person is positive, a person with disability is positive, what is more significant is mapping of services with activities of daily living. Also assistive devices, whichever, like whether it's a wheelchair or any kind of a hearing aid or any kind of assistive device is required. So it has to be, the arrangements has to be there. I want to share, one of the case study where in Mumbai, the child, 18 years old child was diagnosed positive, and this is 2020 in the first wave. And this child with intellectual disability was diagnosed positive, and all the hospital authorities, they separated the mother and the child. And this child died because he was separated. So you can imagine that, how a child with intellectual disability, and the caregiver is the predominant support system for him. And if these two are separated in the name of isolation, and then how it may lead to death of a child. Another child with, with a muscular dystrophy in the slums of Mumbai, and we were working with him, and the pandemic came. And in the pandemic, when, and he was in a vegetative state, when we started working with him, the parents said he didn't go out of the house for 5 years. So you can imagine person with disability living in slums or in isolated places for years and years, and there's no facilities. And when in terms of COVID-19, they're dependent on their siblings and community overall. So I want to state that, one has to really think about all these vulnerable situations and marginalized situation of persons with disability. Mainstreaming disability in COVID-19 is extremely important. Ensuring mainstreaming of disability in all COVID-19 responses and recovery together has to have a targeted actions. And a combination of mainstreaming disability-specific measures, means tailor-made services, is very, very essential in terms of day-to-day living, and how it has to be a disability inclusive response is important in terms of planning the interventions in home isolation. One of my student, quickly I'll share, she has 3 grandmothers, and she was like passed out from TIS, and she said, ma'am, we have arranged all possible facilities of the world for 3 of them, and 1 expired, and 1 was dementia, other was hearing impairment, and the 3rd one was blindness. So, managing with best facilities also you may not actually really do the best possible facilities for them, but 1 expired due to COVID, and the other 2 was living. And, the most important thing is, elderly, to taking care of elderly with disability and dual disability, triple disabilities are also one has to keep in mind. Ensuring accessibility of information like sign language, facilities in terms of the tailor-made accessible facilities. Washrooms are very important in terms of making them, important in terms of taking care of them. So I think my time is up, and if any questions are there, I would love to answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kole. So we will take questions in the end. So all the speakers will first make their presentation, then we'll come to the questions. So
thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I heard from you that it's really challenging that to have a home isolation for disabled people at the home. You flagged or highlighted a large facility for institutional isolation. I'll ask you a question in the next round that is it really possible to do any or to follow any approach to do home isolation for disabled people? That's one part. And second, is it required to have a separate facility of such a large size, or can it be done in a COVID care center or COVID care facility with a few beds are allocated or a particular section is allocated for people with disability? But you don't have to answer that right now. I'll ask you in the last
Sure.
round.
Thank you.
Thank you. So without further ado, I'll invite our next speaker, Mr. Amol. He works with Jan Swasthya Abhiyan. He has a lot of years of experience in the grassroots activism as well as working with the community-based organization. I request him to please share his experience on community experience on home isolation, both in rural and urban area. But it will be great if you can highlight also about the challenges of migrants in home isolation. Thank you. Mr. Nati.
Yeah. Thanks, Chandrakant and USAID and Japaigo for inviting me for this discussion. So basically, what we are trying to look out and the ground level, what is happening from last year and this year, and also about this home isolation part. I think this home isolation things should be look out in a holistic approach, because whole the strategy of the government this time, identification, then isolation, testing and treatment. So this should be all together seen, not in a piecemeal approach, but in a collective approach. Because whatever the whole experience, I'm trying to talk more on rural setting and the migrant workers. So if you see this year, basically last year, there were more kind of isolation centers, quarantine centers and all that be set up by the government. This year it was more or less very less in various areas. The entire focus was more on treatment part and more on testing and treatment part, less on isolation part, and identification also, contact tracing was also compared to less. So also the most important thing about, if you see about this whole migrants and other stuff, we don't have the data. So as per the civil society, there are 50, 60 lakhs, 70 lakhs, somebody is taking 60, somebody is 70. So there is and last year we tried to set up a whole data that we should look out the data of each informal sector. And recently National Human Rights Commission was also planning to develop an advisory. They were also looking for some advisory for the migrant workers. So here the most important thing, and what I'm trying to understood from my whole experience doing trainings for the ASA workers in one of the districts in Madhya Pradesh, Khargone district, along with Jan Swasthya Abhiyan and NHM and Ajim Premji Foundation. So the whole the setup of that, if you see, there is a divide. There is a digital divide, there is an economic divide, there is a cultural divide, there is a social divide, and also of course rural urban setting. So in looking in these parameters, the isolation guidelines for the urban sector is not going to fit in the rural setup. It's different. It will be different. Also, I'm not talking about only about the guidelines, but also the treatment protocols. For example, now presently the responsibility of all isolations and this identification and survey is with the ASA workers and the frontline workers. But most of the areas, they are not trained. They don't have the basic things, basic oximeter and other stuff to how to do the monitor the patients in the isolation center. The other thing, what is happening in the ground, there is a conflict has initiated between the community and the police, as well as the community health frontline workers. So it's not only a stigma, it's also about the awareness and the proper kind of communication channel and the communication patterns. For example, in some of the villages, if some police officer goes to one of the districts of tribal district, tribal village of Rajput district, and the whole tribal community, they told we are not going because they feel that some police is coming to, I've done some guilt or done some crime. So the whole thing about this whole approach in Odisha, there is one of the area where there are 20 to 25 tribals are affected with the COVID, and now they are telling you we are not going to go in the isolation center. Finally, when the intervention of the civil society and the local groups, they finally decided to go, and then the isolation center was set up in one of the old Gandhian Institute, and then they have shifted finally after the whole, because it's also cultural, it's also not the parameters. The second thing about the whole referral system, home isolation has to be supported by the referral system. we can see the divide. Because if you see in Mumbai, if somebody is in the home isolation at Mumbai, he is going to get 2 calls every day from Mumbai Municipal Corporation. But if the same person is sick in some other districts of Madhya Pradesh or Chhattisgarh or Bihar, he's not going to get every day 2 calls. So 1 phone calls is very important. So here, so it may be, we can say digital, it may be communication, it may be of networking, whatever you can say. But it's also a how we can collate the whole different opinions and different kinds of challenges which happening, how to rule out this. That second aspect about the whole kind of support system in the family and the joint family and the community setup. For example, in the flat system guidelines for isolation, it's not going to fit for the rural community, and also especially when the migrants are coming. So large number of migrants. Last year, there was also a conflict between some migrants who were staying outside the village and they stayed for 14 days and 20 days. This time, it's not like that. They are coming directly to the village. So also the entire focus of rural earlier, the whole focus of isolation was urban. And that's why this, not only I'm talking about isolation, but also the testing and other parts. So it's also important to, it has to be supported by standard treatment protocols. So we are suggesting, now there is a whole debate and discussion about the use of steroids by the quacks and all that. But if you see in the rural areas, in the tribal area, who are the ultimate saviors? They are the Gramin, we are now calling them Gramin Chikitsak. We're not calling them the quacks because they are the persons who are actually helping the villagers for getting treatment things. So there is also need, home isolation has to be supported by standard treatment protocols or kind of treatment. We can't just give a paracetamol, then villagers will say, what about the other stuff? And the quacks and Gramin Chikitsak are giving this. The third thing about, it's also very important, the home isolation part, this whole isolation has to be supported by the confusion, not related to the vaccine, but also related to the mask. What kind of mask one should wear? N95 or gamcha or the simple towel or this. Now a new study has come out due to the mask and the wrong quality of mask. This is the mucormycosis and other thing is coming out. So it's also important to create the whole confusion. And this time it's also very important. Then this time also there are cases, post-vaccination cases happening, and there is also a conflict and there is a clear cut that about the conflict is going on regarding the vaccination, because lots of deaths happen in some of the rural settings and they are telling we don't want vaccination kind of. So here it's also important to vaccination and the home isolation things. If we are going to develop this whole protocol, there is a Government of India protocol also, but it has to be supported by a strong supportive mechanism. It can be not only for example, the individual, there are individuals in the migrants are coming. It has to be supported by the community participation. And there are some kind of community and the panchayat level system and this whole system of village health and sanitation committee we try to build up from last 10 years. We try to strengthen this VHSC, but still it's not the way we have visualized 10 years before when the NHM was there. It's not the way it is active in some of the areas. Some are very active, some of the area is not very active. So it's also has to be supported by a strong community-based, community participation committee. You can have a panchayat-wise committee or ward-wise committee or mohalla samiti. It has to be supported. Because if somebody is taking care of with the mild and asymptomatic cases, even though in the isolation center, that person has to be trained. It's trained not only about the one aspect, it's also about the counseling and other stuff, not only about the medicines. Because if you see in the rural areas and the migrants where we are dealing, we don't, for example, there are some few examples, but few of the NGOs and civil society has set up some isolation centers in maybe in Rajasthan and Hyderabad and Bangalore. I know there are 50 bedded, 100 bedded, but it is not sufficient. It has to be centralized state specific things, and it has to be supported by the either schools and panchayat bhavan and all that stuff, but it has to be supported by a strong referral health services system, because otherwise it is sometimes if the person is again become moderate or severe, so where they will go. And also the whole confusion regarding what kind of treatment. In home isolation, somebody is there, what the 14 days protocol, what are you going to do? So that's also lots of confusion, because if you see in the rural areas, lots of videos are coming, lots of information are coming. So people are also getting confused. So there needs to be supported guidelines, supported informations with these frontline workers or the training. It has to be strongly supported by the training mechanism. The other thing about the whole gaps in the basic essentials for home isolations. We have set up in the rural areas, we had given the responsibility. For example, Madhya Pradesh ASHA worker has been given responsibility to look out the patients of home isolation and also the doing the survey and identification of the Kill Corona program. But there is no oximeter. How can we imagine that home isolation has to be there without any basic instrument of oximeters and thermal gun? So this has to be, this whole guidelines has to be supported. It should be part of the guidelines or whatever we are suggesting. If any policy level session, it has to be supported by a strong referral support, as well as the providing the basic personal protective kits to the frontline workers or whoever is looking to the individuals, and also supported by a strong call. For example, the full phone calls, the video calling may be in setup in the rural or urban setup, but this rural setup, it is not working. So how it may be some different kind of mechanism we need to do, and the same challenge is happening with the vaccination things. So I think this is these 3-4 things we need to look out while talking about this protocols. The other stuff is about also we need to look out the whole perception of the home isolation. It's very important to develop some perception or some guidelines with the officials who are dealing this, either with the bureaucrats or the collector or the police, because this is a public health emergency. In reality, if you see, you might all have experiences, it has been dealt as a disaster. So if you dealt this as a disaster, then you put the rule and there are things. So it's also important to put out in that public health emergency perspective, and so that the communication has to be supported by developing the monitoring committee or the zonal wise plan and ward wise plan, so that the migrants also get supported. And it has to be somewhere also, maybe we can also say that home isolation for the migrants or some of the, it has to be a little bit supported by some economic support of also. That's so it has to be a government policy matter. It's not a good platform to discuss here, but also we should suggest that it has to be somewhere suggested board, because they are losing their wages. So I think these are the few comments. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thanks,
Mulinidhi. So you flagged many issues about rural area and also migrant challenges. In interest of time, I'll move to the next speaker. But before that, I want to request participants that if they have any question, they can type their question in the chat box. We will take these questions to the respected panelists. So you can write the name of the panelists also to whom you are asking question. We have around 15 minutes toward the end of this panel to get your response to your questions. So without further ado, I invite Dr. Kishore Kumar, who will be talking about mental health issues and home isolation. He works with the Banyan in Chennai. Dr. Kishore Kumar, over to you. 7 minutes, 8 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Leharia. It has been a wonderful opportunity for us to talk about what all we have been able to do. Yes. So strategies for home isolation, the vulnerable population. To just understand what vulnerability means is for people who are at great risk for poor health status, are having difficulties in health access, experience significant disparities in life expectancy, access to use of healthcare services, morbidity, mortality. This population is also likely to have one or more physical and mental conditions. I thought this understanding is going to be very, very important for us to be putting everything in perspective. Approximately 1/5 of the world's population live and earn less than $1.25 per day. In India, about 84 million people are categorized as ultra poor. Ultra poor suffer from multi-dimensional poverty, impacting education, health, living standards, which is measured by what is called a multi-dimensional poverty index. Homeless people with mental illness amount to approximately 4 lakh population in India, because the last survey suggests that it's about 2 million population. We have about 8.4% of indigenous population, and about 243 million people who are in the adolescent category. Home isolation in clustered housing is going to be extremely challenging, as one of the Dr. Kadri who was talking about slums. In clustered housing, it is going to become extremely challenging because there is no privacy, lack of running water and sanitary protocols. One toilet for every 50 families in tribal locations is going to be another major barrier. Average income per day is about 133 rupees per family of the tribal population. Added to this is the loss of jobs, seasonal work, and substance use problems in the tribal population. We at the Banyan are focusing on 4 important target groups. One is the mentally ill in institutions. Those are homeless people who are brought into institutions, homeless people who live on the streets. Then the next group is the people who are begging, institutional women, juvenile homes, and the prison population. So the institutional care, homeless shelters, beggars home, prison population, homes for the elderly, distressed women, and juvenile homes, all can pose a very great challenge. Public health protocols, pre-COVID protocols that was there will influence the way bed spacing, staff training, basic nutritional inputs are going to be organized. Current status of the mentally ill morale of the frontline workers can be seriously affected, and the mental health professionals. Quarantined with clients, creating a bubble is also going to be a very, very important way of preventing spread of infection. At the same time, people, staff taking responsibility, looking towards oneness in the institution, creating family-like values of sharing, having trust, respect for each other is going to be an important process, but it can be challenging also. While we have done with the institutional category, we have another important voiceless category, which is the homeless on the street. They are alone without support. Their networks don't exist anymore because the social capital has disappeared overnight. There are no people, no shops, everything is closed, places of worship is closed. So they constantly have to fight to survive. In addition, they can experience physical abuse. Women can be abused sexually, isolation resulting sometimes in a sense of alienation. Isolation has also brought in a new phenomena called as violence. There is increased documented domestic violence, interpersonal violence. Children experiencing anger in the family can be seriously traumatized and affected. And on top of that, there is tremendous sense of financial insecurity. Institutional psychiatric facilities, what have we done as a model? So COVID care in the context of mental health problems is the most challenging in a pandemic like this. COVID compliant behaviors like masks, social distancing, hand hygiene can be perceived as very intimidating by patients. Needs repeated supervision, which can be exhausting and tiring for the staff. Fixing plastic screens to prevent spread of airborne infections in the wards, to separate them by 2 meters, being able to develop the spread of infection. The ritual of eating food can be an important source where spread is imminent. Therefore, food being served in their own ward in disposable plates, has been an important way we were able to restrict the movement of people in the facility to reduce the spread of infection. Sanitization of the facility, wards being done 2 times in a day can be extremely challenging and demanding because of the lack of resources. So patients who have recovered could be employed to help in housekeeping and kitchen activity, periodic meetings. All of these functions have to happen on an emergency or a war footing like situation. Periodic group meeting with the staff to increase their morale because it can be mentally tiring. Extend support, organize debriefing meeting to understand what has happened, what were the difficulties, what gaps existed, and try to sort it. Total coverage for vaccination in our facility has been 100% for both staff and patients. Strategies for homelessness would be isolation cannot be done during the pandemics on the streets. The life on the streets is going to be extremely very difficult. So screen the individuals by street engagement, swab testing, refer them to COVID care centers or hospital depending upon the need and the clinical situation. Increase in access to basic facilities in all the shelters, that is the corporation shelters that exist, so that they are able to access food, water, toilet facilities, and creating mechanisms for social distancing without compromising on anything. Sometimes it can so happen that there can be a devastating effect on spread of infection if these are not being followed properly. Increase volunteer engagement, network with NGOs and governmental agencies. This is one disaster where volunteer engagement to work on the field has been significantly less compared to other kinds of disasters due to fear of contracting infection. Strategies to reduce violence, identifying a neighbor, friend, relative, colleague, or a shelter to go in case one needs to leave the house immediately for safety. Then to plan a way to exit the house whenever there is necessity. Keep few essential items like identification of documents, phone, money, medicines, clothes, then a list of telephone numbers in case if that is necessary. If possible, develop a code with trusted neighbors so that they can come out and access safety whenever they are in danger. The operational aspects of the whole thing is for an institution like the Banyan or place where psychiatric facilities are to be, people with mental health problems have to be taken care of. Formation of COVID task force monitoring team to review the situation 2 times in a day is going to be very, very crucial. Protocols were translated into vernacular language and circulated to the staff is absolutely important. Revision of strategies if one strategy did not work or some gaps exist in the strategy. Understanding the levels and limits of care so that appropriate referrals can be made, as the previous colleague was talking about, referral guidelines to be clear. Training people in donning and doffing processes is going to be extremely critical to see that they don't get contaminated. Duty rosters for on-site and work from home has to be developed very clearly. Compliance with protocol for entry into the facility for the staff based on duty roster is going to be very important so that effective deployment of human resource happens. So if I have to continue the operational aspects, home visits to people living in tribal locations to mitigate their problems are absolutely necessary. Dispensing dry ration packets to all vulnerable persons and families. Direct bank transfers for eligible individuals. medical assistance to families and providing them ambulation support as and when necessary, street engagement, visits in the city, facilitation of admission for COVID positive patients among those from the street, and responding to acute distress and grief counseling for the needy families. In conclusion, COVID care is a tremendous challenge, as we all know, with all groups of vulnerable population. While it is a huge challenge with the non-homeless population, with the homeless population and the vulnerable population, it can be extremely challenging. Banyan is perhaps the first NGO in the country to have worked through the first wave and second wave of the pandemic by modifying the protocols that were announced, published based on our own needs. 116 persons were provided outreach care during the active pandemic on the streets. 42 homeless mentally ill people were brought, rescued, and admitted into the hospital in special isolation centers. About 1,300 800 dry ration kits were delivered to the homeless people and the vulnerable population. 281 families received direct bank transfers. Mortality in the first wave was about 4 people, second wave 1. About 1,200 oxygen concentrators were provided to the government as part of responding to the need. 2 oxygen plants are being commissioned very shortly. So this is in conclusion, the work that we have done so far to understand how to respond to the challenges that comes up. There are extremely difficult challenges with respect to mentally ill people because they don't comply with whatever you want them to do. Sometimes a patient will require about 15 to 20 masks in a day because that person will keep on discarding it, drop it on the ground, and the same thing cannot be used. So like that, observing things from a very close quarters, sorting out problems on an hourly basis is going to be the key way to respond to the situation and prevent spread of infection. Thank you, Dr. Laharia and team for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. So this was really full of information and a lot to digest from this presentation. We will definitely revert to you if we need some clarification, and maybe we will have a dialogue after this webinar. So quickly moving to Dr. Sanjana Mohan. She's from Basic Healthcare Services, and I request her to please present her talk about rural settings and tribal population and home isolation. Dr. Sanjana Mohan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dr. Chandrakant, and thanks to the organizers for inviting us for this session. I will be sharing about our experience in dealing with the second wave of COVID, and I come from Basic Healthcare Services, which works in rural southern Rajasthan, which is largely tribal. Next, please. So these are the kind of areas where we work, and the communities live in very scattered habitations. A lot of male migration is here, food scarcity, huge burdens of malnutrition, and high burdens of illnesses and death. Next, please. So when the second wave came and it just spread through the rural areas, what we were seeing is that village after village were affected, and the numbers were too many for the public system to be able to handle, whether for testing or for admission. We saw a huge absence of trust and a lot of fear in public health systems. And this was also one of the reasons why communities started seeking care more from informal providers as well as from the faith healers. There are large gaps in knowledge. Why should they wear masks? Why should there not be congregations? And this is a big problem with a lot of marriages going on and other events also, where maybe 50 to 100 people gather very often in a village. And why do they really need the vaccine? I'll talk a little more on this later. Also, transport options shrunk as a kind of a lockdown was brought into place, and people also did not have money to go out and seek care, and the hospitals were fully stretched. So it was clear that we needed solutions locally. Next, please. Yeah. So our strategy is three-pronged. One is at the community level, we work on promoting awareness, especially vaccination and identification and care of COVID in the community. Together with the government, we've set up COVID care centers at the block level for managing people with COVID of moderate severity. And a telephone helpline has been rolled out to support the tribal communities through information, as well as support those who are down with COVID and facilitate referrals for those who may be having severe disease. So the community care, there are the two elements. One is awareness on corona. I say corona because here that is how it is known as. So there are 4 elements to the awareness. What about personal protection? How can they protect themselves? Why is it needed? Why it is important to avoid large gatherings? What is the big importance of vaccine, and why should the people get vaccinated? And how do they start thinking that there could be COVID in their home and then seek care? And in community COVID care, our volunteers identify people with COVID, and here we use the syndromic definition based on the symptoms. We don't go in for tests because tests are not available at the village level. They are available mostly at block headquarters, very far away. And in the last few weeks, the government guidelines have also recommended, starting treatment and promoting home care for people based on symptoms. Our volunteers also provide medicine kits containing only the essential medicines that people with COVID need. They also follow up and support and are alert to identify any who develop signs of severe COVID. Next, please. So quickly about the structure, because the areas are so spread out, as I think most of the tribal areas in other parts of the country also are, with people living in very scattered habitations. There is a block team. Then there is a regional team which is closer to the volunteers. And finally, at the village level, there are the volunteers who spread awareness, who also identify people affected with COVID, who distribute kits, and support families. Next, please. Yeah. So in home care, after volunteers have identified those with COVID, which could be a person with fever or cough or cold or sore throat, they provide the medicine kit and pamphlet. You see a section of the pamphlet here, which is given to all families who are then counseled for self-isolation. If the house has windows and fans, which many of them don't, they are advised to keep the windows open and the fans on. We advise them to take lots of fluids, chaach, nibu pani, what others they have. And here there are also the barriers, which have been there for a long time, that sour foods are not to be consumed whenever there is cough or cold or sore throat. We advise families that people affected should lie in prone position during the day. Also to be alert for danger signs. So for example, if a person is running high-grade fever, which has continued after 5 days, then he or she should be alert and reach out to the volunteer. Or if cough becomes very severe again after 5 to 7 days, or the person is having breathing difficulty. Recently, we have also equipped the volunteers with pulse oximeters, so they know that if the oxygen levels drop to less than 95, they are to be alerted and immediately connect with their supervisor for referring one such person to the nearest functional primary health facility. We also advise them to stay active, walk around. And this is something good that we see, that in the villages, we see many of the people who are affected. We've seen this in our nurses, in our health workers also, that they also stay active, walk around a bit. And maybe this also helps in their recovery as well. So, speakers before me also spoke of how social media has just, kind of taken over rural areas as well. It is really important to keep them motivated, because the word of COVID or corona brings so much of fear. So that's also something our volunteers do. They keep motivating them that the disease it's a disease, it will pass in 10 to 12 days. And they always remember this. Next, please. So the place of stay, in most places, the people affected stay inside their home or sometimes outside, in a veranda next to their home, under a tree. And we've seen many of our health workers, nurses who were affected and who also came from villages manage their isolation period very nice in this manner. But it would like to admit that it is challenging to get a suitable place many a times. I would say maybe in 30% instances, it is challenging. And this is especially for women. And here other factors also come into play. So if the daughter-in-law of the house is affected, how do we ask her to stay away when she has to also make food for the family when she is ill? And also other women, or even older women is expected to perform, a lot of the household chores. So how does she either go out of the home under a tree or the other families move out? So here, in addition to the actually, small dealing kind of the challenge of the small dwelling that they live in, there are also the social, the cultural issues to deal with. The weather also plays a role. It's very, very hot here in Udaipur, in Dungarpur, Banswara in the present days. So going out and living under a tree is more difficult. Maybe in a few weeks when rains are here, it might be a bit easier to then go out of home and in the open. The volunteers visit all affected people once every 2 to 3 days. And for any danger signs, the people are asked to connect with the volunteers or the telephone helpline. So they are asked to come to the nearby primary healthcare clinics or COVID care centers, which are a little further. They are at the block level. But we see there is a huge fear and families are not at all ready to come out. In fact, just yesterday, I learned of a ward punch who had been down with COVID, who had severe disease for 3 days. And after that, he finally decided to go to the block level, but then went from one facility to another and yet to a third facility. And in this process, traveling maybe about 100 kilometers. And finally, before he could receive care, he passed away. So this was a ward punch. And you can imagine what the situation would be for a, for a man or a woman living in one of these villages. Next, please. So safety of the team, speakers before me also spoke about it. It is very important for us as well. Our volunteers are equipped with multi-layered cloth masks, face shields, and sanitizers. And they meet people in the open, do not go indoors. And we also run primary healthcare clinics here in rural areas, in rural Udaipur and also in rural Dungarpur. And now we have over a year's experience of managing also the outdoor also managing the outdoor in open areas. And we've seen that this really helps in reducing transmission. And we ask our team to isolate themselves at the slightest sign and then to come back after 2 weeks. Meetings also we try to do as many via Zoom, but the meetings with the local team, the volunteers, are all done in person in open spaces. Next, please. Yeah, so these are the numbers, and these come from only one block after about 2 weeks of work. So we were able to reach out to 1,600 households and identify over 850 people with COVID and distributed nearly 500 kits. So our work is presently on in 5 blocks, and we have together seen and supported almost 2,500 people with COVID for home care. In this block, we identified 5 people with severe disease, one of who was referred. Next, please. Yeah. So I'll talk a little of the quarantine centers. We saw a lot of quarantine centers being set up more in last year in schools, hostels, but there were a lot of issues. And speakers before me have also spoken about these. So while in village or close to village, they were still away from home and cut off from families. And the stress, anxiety in such situation is likely to go up a lot. We saw that there was not so much participation of local community, which might have helped transform these centers into something much more livable and where people could be better connected. And we saw a lot of, resistance of people in coming here. And based on our experience, we feel that a mix of home care, which would still work for most, and few maybe, exclusive separate homes set up within the villages for those who need a separate place, may be the answer. But we haven't really worked on this, something to, we'll be kind of taking up more in the coming weeks. Next, please. Yeah. So yeah, a big challenge that we saw was the total breakage of trust in the system. These are just some of the quotes. So when our volunteers also note down the name of the affected person, immediately they are asked, why are you noting our name? You will tell this to the government, they will take us away. People are not ready to take medicines from the Asha or Anganwadi worker. And a new kind of message going around is that they are mixing the vaccine and the medicine. And most frequently heard messages that those who take the vaccine die within 6 months. So building trust of the communities through working with local influential persons, youth groups, Ashas and ANMs, we feel that this is something really important to work on to build up the trust back again, and then to help promote care of people with COVID in the community. Sure. Next, please. Yeah, this is my last slide. So the material that we've developed, videos, can all be seen on this link. Yeah, next, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjana. This was really a nice and comprehensive presentation. And especially I want to highlight that in the first part of webinar, or the part 1 of the webinar, we had heard some speakers saying that in the tribal settings, it's impossible to have home isolation, while the experience which you share coming from a tribal population indicate that it is possible. So, of course, that's the advantage of having a dialogue with a very group of stakeholders, and especially those who are involved directly. You highlighted that how three-way partnership between the community or the home isolation facility and the treatment centers and teleconsultation combined can help, and this can work. So really promising, and thank you very much for sharing this experience. I will come back to you once all the panelists speak with a question. The question to you would be that that we know that there is a low level of literacy, especially in tribal population. So when there is such a low level of literacy, and they often have a different type of languages which are spoken in that setup. So how to communicate and how to ensure that they understand the home isolation protocol, and what specifically can be done to ensure better understanding of those guidelines. But that question is for later. Now I invite our last panelist, Dr. Basavaraju. He works with GRAM, so he would be talking his grassroots experience in the wide range of area. Dr. Basavaraju, over to you.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hello.
Yes.
You're audible.
Oh, sorry. I was not able to hear. Thank you. Should I go on, Dr. Chandrakant?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So firstly, sorry, there are some audio issues in between. I couldn't hear whether I was called or not. So thanks, Dr. Chandrakant, for this wonderful moderation and invitation. Thanks to the team of leadership of JPIGO for inviting me to share my thoughts. And thanks for being liberal in giving a broad topic to me, unlike boxing to a specific target group. It's an advantage in a way. So because I have had a wonderful August learned panelist, I can reiterate what they said and reinforce. As a last speaker, I also have a challenge. What new can I speak? But I have an advantage also of having a very attentive and active participants. Those who are really interested, they'll stay tuned till the long that I know. So thanks for this opportunity. But let me tell you a story from our experience. We are currently working in rural areas of Mysuru with a vision of making panchayats COVID-free. And with a mission of developing a community-based management system for COVID by building panchayats, their capabilities in handling and managing COVID-19 situation in the rural area. Let me narrate a story which happened just yesterday. So we are all actually in a village wherein we got a call from the villagers, where the village local task force we have created. They called us and said, so there is a man, actually there's a family, they're not listening to us. So please come and talk to them. So we wondered what could be the problem, and we went there. And there was a young person who is tested as COVID-19 positive. And he, along with his family, are freely moving around in the village and going to the agricultural field for wage labor, etc. Which, of course, we can't deny that is there necessary. There is a need actually to work. But we tried to talk to him. But listening to the response of that man, the father of the COVID-19 tested positive person, we are shocked and astonished, because that's quite unusual to hear from a villager normally. Because in village we know for like the brotherhood, the cohesiveness, and care for each other. A man said, yes, we are going around, true, but there is a problem. My son is diagnosed as a positive, but let the entire village get positive, become positive. It was a very shocking statement to hear from that man. But thankfully, he went on to clarify. In his own next sentence, there was a clarification, but that will communicate you the attitudinal challenges what we have in the rural areas today. He said, firstly, all of us will be positive. If you go on test, so the result, I'm sure, I'll bet with you that everybody results will be positive. So there is no exception. This corona is not going to leave anybody, and all of us, if we get tested, will be positive, and no need to worry. That was a statement. How do you pursue this? The reaction, I don't know. So secondly, the youths continued to say, I'm fine. I don't have any problem. These people simply showed my COVID result as positive. Why should I stay at home? I don't have any fever. My temperature is normal. I don't have any problem. No fatigue. Why should I be at home? This is the reaction we got. And finally, of course, with all our communication abilities, we pursued that person, convinced, and finally convinced him to go to the institutional facility for isolation. The same way, there are a lot of other attitudinal challenges we are finding in the community. Another major one is, anyways, I'll get the COVID. What's the point in taking preventive measures? This COVID is not going to leave any one of us. So it's going to come to us. Why should I be so scared and so be preventive, fussy about taking all these preventive measures? These are another questions and attitudinal challenges we have. And there is also a feeling, I don't know whether sometimes these studies will help us or sometimes it will pose a new challenge in the community. They say, I would have already got the COVID. So what is the new problem? So many studies and media also said 60% of the people, probably 50% of the people have already got the COVID. Why should we? It's probably it has come and gone. So why should we be more fussy about that? These are all the attitudinal challenges. Similarly, as my fellow panelist said, there's a strong anger against ASHAs also, probably because of the target given to them to cover immunization. So, and exceptional incidences due to some other reasons, the deaths happened, probably some initial reaction they have found amongst people who have taken vaccination. So there's a strong fear and as well as anger against ASHA that's actually making in the second wave to manage situation appropriately in the rural area. In city area, in the urban area, family means for all of us, either it could be 2+2, 2+1 or 1+1. But in the villages, as my panelist also said, it's a cluster. So family for them is their nephew, their brother, somebody else living in the side by side, the same area. It's a cluster of habitation within the home. And how do you say you are the house person, you are the person belong to this house, you are the person don't belong to this house. Very difficult to categorize them or separate them. And another strong 3 words we are listening in the community is, they will take us, lock us, and finish us. So if we are at home, we are safe. If we go to institutional facility, that will be our fate. We can't come back to home. Of course, it could be exceptional cases. Those exceptional cases has become probably many are considering them as a norm and fearing to go for institutional isolation, come what may, whatever the limitation they have in the villages. And specifically youth, somehow they are information full, but they're scared. They're not disclosing symptoms, syndromes, as well as even though sometimes they've got test results, they'll take 2 to 3 days to communicate to their house people. And until then, probably they would have communicated this to their people in the house also. These are all the attitudinal challenges. Coming to the systemic, let me draw your attention to some of the systemic issues what we have at home. The changing strategies. Initially, whatever it may be, the 4T, 5T model, the strongly propagated, advocated, and practiced. Suddenly, some of the governments, even local governments, district level authorities started taking the decision that will go by syndromic approach. It's good as a preventive approach. I agree with you. So as Sanjana ji also presented before me, the tribal area where testing is not at all available, it is very difficult to reach the testing equipments and services. It's better to be cautious, take a syndromic approach, isolate people with the symptoms, but it is important to test. That's what we have experienced. If we don't test, so people will not be serious unless they are having some message or a certificate or whatever the official communication that they're COVID positive. So they are not going to be serious. Enforcing home isolation is also a challenge for the rural authorities, be it for ASHA or panchayats. If they are not officially tested positive, they'll argue that nothing has happened to them, and ensuring and enforcing home isolation is a challenge. And also it started confusing. Again, for example, yesterday a new directive is issued by the government that now we are intensifying the test. 13 lakh testing kits reached Mysore itself, one district itself. Now we are going to intensify the test, go to door survey, do testing, etc. The last 1 week or 2 weeks, we have told ASHAs, Anganwadi workers, and ANMs that no need of testing, go by syndromic approach, give these medicines of corona as a uniform measure to anybody having symptoms. Now you are saying you need to get tested. So there's a strong point in our community's argument. No, why should I go for test? And tests are happening only at the PHCs. Of course, this was told by my earlier panelist also. Teleconsultation and counseling is a challenge in the rural area. As my panelist also said, like we are parallelly providing teleconsultation counseling services in the name of Team Spandana to COVID-19 people. We thought initially we are duplicating the intervention because government will also be giving them teleconsultation and counseling, but hardly they are getting maximum 2 calls. One at the beginning, the moment their information is entered to the system. Secondly, when they are expected to complete their isolation period. So not more. Even government having these challenges to reach out to them with the required number of counseling sessions. So what they normally do for the people in the rural, in the urban area. And frontline workers are not empowered to enforce isolation. So ASHA has their own people, Anganwadi workers, they're our own people. So they can easily argue with them and send them back. But where are the manpower, where are the human resources available? So they are also not empowered. Some of the even panchayat members are also staying away from these cases, incidences, because they are also having a fear of getting this virus. And more importantly, the lack of coordination and cohesive action between the people in major institutions working in the villages to enforce this home isolation appropriately. Also, this cohesion and coordination required to garner resources, to mobilize community, to channelize external resources, and also to map the civil society organizations and partner with them, and also to get the volunteer support. This major thing, although there are proactive action from the civil society sector, so this coordination and cohesiveness from the government side it looks like it's missing. Third important thing, infrastructure, which is easy, which is already heard by many people. One is small houses. You know about that. I don't have to reiterate. PHCs doesn't have enough facilities, lack of basic aids and equipments with ASHAs. When you are taking a decision to go by syndromic approach, and ASHAs and Anganwadi workers don't even have oximeters and thermometers, what kind of preventive actions you can take and emergency management you can ensure at the ground level. And digital literacy is another challenge, having connection as well as literacy, because to get any services related to COVID, people say you call Apta Mitra facility, you call COVID helpline, you find bed status online, but how to find all these things online? That's another challenges in the and challenges for the home isolation from the livelihood perspective. Now it's a monsoon season. If you miss an opportunity, who will know what is my plight for the next 1 year? That's the question raised by the farmers. They need to go to the field. We have seen people with positive status are just 4 to 5 days after tested positive or being in home isolation going to their field. Secondly, animal husbandry. This is one of the major and practical challenges we are finding. People in the rural area certainly have one or more than one cows and animals to take care. But if they stay at home, who will manage those animals? Who will take them to the field? Who will get them the fodder? So that's another challenge which is forcing them. Unlike other situations, nobody is coming them for their aid. Okay, don't worry, let me take care of your animals for the next 2 days, because they're also fear that I'll contract the virus. Nobody is going to their support. That's another major challenges we are facing. And wage earners, this is the season, and women. Sir, I think I have not taken much time, but
yeah, you can wrap up in 1 minute.
That's a problem being last speaker. I understand. Thank you. And
Thank you.
the women, if you are a woman, you have got a COVID positive, that's more challenge. Who will cook home? They believe me, they can't even take rest, appropriate rest, what you have taken. But what shall we do? Let me come to the final and solutions. I pose a lot of challenges and problems. Let me also answer some of the solutions, what could be. One is we only have an answer in community-based management of COVID-19. So we need to, sitting in Delhi, sitting in Bangalore, governments of state, even at the district level cannot manage. If I take by number wise, there are 22 assistant director level officers per taluk, per block level. There are more than 300 to 400 villages in one taluka, one block. So how you ensure that all these government officers and bureaucrats would reach and reach services to the people in the rural area? Unless what we are doing at Gram. So we have devised a project called COVID Reach and going with one sentence, Panchatantra Grama Mantra. What are those Panchatantra? 5 strategies. First level, strengthen the GP task force, Gram Panchayat level and village Panchayat level task force. Have a specific 90 days action plan. So it's not only from the point of view of COVID, from the larger public health perspective, because we don't want any other co-infections and co-health issues to come in the prevailing COVID situation. So have that 90-day plan of action. Constituting team ICAN. ICAN means, as you know, I can do it. Secondly, basically it's information, care and network. So having 5 to 6 youth volunteers who can be a bridge between COVID-19 positive people and the service delivery mechanism, reaching them information, care and network. Thirdly, involvement of community-based organization. SHGs as a behavioral change agents, because mothers are the best behavioral change agents, number one. Secondly, you know, involving the dairy cooperatives, local dairy cooperatives, so that they can take care of the animals in this kind of situation and also reach benefit and also be a change agent in the villages. Third, fourth level, support system for the frontline workers. We need to really empower frontline workers with social support, building a social capital around them. That's importantly what we are trying to do through village task force. When the village task force is built, so suddenly there is an escalation point for the ASHA and ANM to go and communicate their problem, their requirement, the need of support to the village level task force. Fifthly, mapping civil society organization. Each panchayat, one civil society organization, so that we can channelize the resources to one panchayat completely instead of duplication. And more importantly, we, community isolation or supports we need to bring in. What we are trying, what's happening in Karnataka is utilizing hostels children's hostel anyways, which is vacant now, as a community isolation center because it has got all the facilities. Number of toilets are available, the cooking facilities are available, cooking staff are available. So convert the hostels as a isolation center. Secondly, if the wave is continuing, God forbid it will not, but it continues, utilizing schools as an isolation centers and opportunities. So a scheme like Matrupurna, some of you might have heard about these kind of schemes, the schemes implemented by ICDS for providing nutritious meal to pregnant and lactating mother, which is stopped now. But we strongly urge, and I think that should be taken as addition at the policy level, to start the Matrupurna scheme, so that a nutritious meal can be reached to pregnant and lactating mothers in case of isolation, in case of their families got affected, and also to the people who are in need of basic food support and services. And milk producer cooperatives, as I said, should be inward mobile vehicle to reach out basic essentials. So people, they don't have individual vehicles, personal vehicles to go to the market once a week and get the essentials to their home. They are using same autos, shared autos. There is no government bus services available. Local private shared auto will not follow any COVID norms of going by 50%, taking 50% passengers all the time. So that's another super spreader for the COVID-19. So how can we reach basic essentials to the people and equip, more importantly, village rehabilitation workers to reach care and support to people with disability and use them also as a frontline workers, which is completely ignored right now. With this, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Basavaraju. So with each of the speakers coming with such a rich experience, it's really pity that we have to put each one of you in constraint of 8 minutes or 10 minutes. We really want to hear each one of you, but you would understand that there is a limited time. So we have already shot 10 minutes beyond the suggested time. So what we will do, I'll take 2 or 3 questions. One of the questions which were there for Dr. Basavaraju, he has already answered. The question was focused upon that how to keep Panchayat COVID free. And you have already discussed Panch Tantra, so we'll not ask you that question again. There were a few questions I flagged to 2 of the panelists. I would request them to provide bullet point answer in 30 seconds. And then to remaining panelists, I'll come for 30 seconds for their concluding or closing remarks. But I really request, because we don't know when this Zoom webinar might get disconnected. This is time bound. So Dr. Vaishali Kolhe, 30 seconds, please answer that why we require a separate institutional facility for people with disability. Why can't a particular isolation facility can have a few dedicated beds or wings for people with disability? You are on mute. Dr. Kolhe, you are on mute. You have to unmute yourself. Not yet. As she's trying to resolve that issue, maybe I'll go to Dr. Sanjana Mohan. The question is the same, that how to pass on the communication related to home isolation to women who has a limited literacy. And another linked question is that how to increase COVID-19 testing in tribal population. Like 30 seconds to 1 minute, please.
Sure. So we have seen, Chandrakant, that when we follow the basic principles of communication, being respectful, active listening, talking at the same level, these measures help. Another part of our work is also taking science to the people. They may be uneducated, but unless they know the basics, they will not accept. So for example, why should they take the vaccine? They have to understand it. Also, why home isolation? What happens if they don't practice home isolation and that the entire home gets affected one after another? So it is challenging, no doubt, but I'll just share one example of a traditional birth attendant, very old, in her 70s. We went to meet with her. So she was telling us that, the people say that, government, the officials, they come here and because they want us to die. She says, nobody does that. People will not travel all this way here just with this view that they want us to die. They want us to live, and this is all false. So such messages give us hope, but it is challenging. I will accept that.
And the second, quickly on testing, how to increase testing in tribal areas.
Yeah. So there are, and this comes from our own experience of running a primary health center. So primary health centers are good places. They have lab technician as well. A lot of testing can be done there. It is already being done at several, but it can be expanded more. And then from here, there can be some outreach teams that go out at selected locations. But having said that, Chandrakant, I would still say that we have to come to a balance of testing and, syndromic management.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjana. Dr. Kole, 30 seconds. For
Thank you. I'll just take 30 seconds. That COVID-19 facilities has to be inclusive. So what you said about specialized facilities has to be given for high support needs group, like for example, elderly or very profound disabilities. You require a tailor-made high support facilities. Also in the inclusive system like hospital or home, you need to create that disability specific facilities. For example, deaf person is there. So you need to fundamentally highlight on communication strategies with them. Like they will be verbal, they are non-verbal population with deafness or any other disabilities. So one of the significant factor is planning the communication strategies. So if the communication strategies are not planned, you may not be able to even communicate the, any kind of a vulnerability or crisis or any other situation which they are facing. So communication facilities are fundamental, and access to food, access to sleep, access to medicine, access to sanitation, washrooms, and also prevention from fall and injury. All these things are very important for persons with disabilities.
Okay, thank you very much. So what we will do, like I have not many questions, but there is a time constraint. So from each, we will connect with each one of you with additional questions and to have a better understanding of the challenges. But I don't want to leave before I ask each of the panelists for last 30-second comment. I request strictly 30-second key points that you want to flag, and of course we can connect offline afterwards. So I'll start with Mr. Mulyanidhi, 30 seconds for you.
So basically 5 things I need to do, and one thing is about what we develop in Madhya Pradesh, People's Health and Social Development Plan. We have already developed in Bihar and Madhya Pradesh in 2 of the district. It is very working well. The second thing about integrated community development program, integrated with, and third is about the how to build up the whole coordination between ASHA workers and the community, because this is very important to if you want to enhance this. And the fourth is about developing the multi-sectoral approach, not only NGO, but I'm also talking about the very informal groups who has come forward to help in this various community. So this is very important, and to build the trust rather than going and strengthen this community level, panchayat level plan and the committee. It's very important. And 2 model is already successful. So it is very important. Otherwise this conflict will increase. So build up the confidence of ASHA workers on the ground is very important. These are the 4 or 5 things I think.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nidhi. Dr. Kishore Kumar.
Yeah. Yes, go on. As we know that there are no COVID care centers for the mentally ill people because it is extremely challenging. Whatever we have been able to develop, whether it is the spacing of the beds, whether it is food arrangements, whether it is rota that is there, exit and income policy, for the staff, then engaging them in stress management programs are going to be very, very critical. Similarly, for those people who are homeless on the streets, special attention is necessary because they require street engagement. For the vulnerable population, particularly the tribals, dry rations, education, and for the people who are disabled, education again is going to be very, very important. Mobilizing a lot of support to support the government is going to be an important way to build in resources.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Kishore Kumar. Now, finally, concluding remark for Dr. Basavaraju, exactly 30 seconds. You can start now. Thanks.
So just I want to share this thought with you. Like we, along with JPIGO, we completed the Health and Wellness Center evaluation very recently. While coming back from that evaluation, we were pricing that, okay, the CHO cadre, the new Health and Wellness Center at the subcenter level, the CHO cadre was very helpful in managing the first wave at the, because they're all deputed to the Taluka headquarters, block headquarters. I think after seeing the second wave on the ground, I think we should strongly advocate, we should not be happy about that. We should send them back to the sub-center level. We need all the services, treatment in the villages. There are more village cases now. That's number one. Secondly, I think now the COVID has gone beyond just a public health issue. It's now more like a developmental issue. All of us in the development sector need to come out with a sustained and long-term strategy to address COVID. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Basaraju. So I must say this is really indeed very rich discussion, and I personally have benefited from listening and learning from each one of you. So I personally want to thank you very much for sharing your insight. This will go a long way in improving or operationalizing home isolation guidelines in India. I'm seeing comments in the chat box from participants who also have enjoyed this conversation. I really wish there was more time. I really wish I could have asked some follow-up questions, but that's what the participant also feel, delegate also feel on this webinar. There is no need of concluding from my part. There is so much of information, it's impossible to conclude, but all I would say that we would get back to you. The team at NISHTA would prepare a short summary of this discussion, and we'll definitely get back to you in coming days with some more inputs and information. So thank you once again, and I hand over to Kritika Murli for the vote of thanks and then concluding the webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrakant. Thank you so much to all our esteemed panelists who have taken their time, valuable time, and been with us today. And we have overshot the time, and still all of you all have been there. And thank you so much for the valuable inputs, and all the participants who have joined us today. Like Dr. Chandrakant said, we will be developing a webinar report, and we will be sharing with all of you shortly.
Thank you very much. So we can say bye-bye and then close the webinar.